gentlemen, and welcome to Edgware United Synagogue. Community singing can often be uplifting. Before moving to Edgware, I lived close to Wembley Stadium, and on Cup Final day, I could hear the crowd singing in unison from my house, Abide With Me. And we're all familiar with the fans at the Kop singing the football anthem of Liverpool FC, You'll Never Walk Alone. And never was it more uplifting than when the mass crowd sang as one after the Hillsborough disaster in 1989. Unfortunately, not all gatherings are as friendly or emotional as this, and tonight we shall hear a very different story about problems faced in English football. Football is part of the fabric of British society, and what happens there has ripple effects elsewhere. Around 50 million people attend football each year in the UK, by far the highest attendance of any sport, accounting for 2/3 of all sport attendances. The figures have been boosted by the continued success of the English Premier League, where games are regularly played out in front of packed stands. At a time when post offices, banks, schools, pubs, shops and libraries are closing, football is bucking the trend. If you want to know just how important football is, you need to remember the oft-quoted remark of the late Bill Shankly, the Liverpool manager, "Some people think football is a matter of life and death. I assure you, it's much more serious than that." So it is important that football should play its part in upholding British values, including those relating to equality. You will see that tonight's talk is entitled Tackling Racism and Anti-Semitism in Sport. This session may be taking place in a synagogue where we are only too aware of the growth of anti-Semitism, but to expand our horizons to include racism in whatever form it manifests itself in the wider community. It is most gratifying to have in our audience tonight people from outside our Jewish community. I want you to know that we as a Jewish community stand shoulder to shoulder with you in fighting racism wherever it is to be found, and that your fight is also our fight. The event tonight is timely. Only today, the BBC headed its online football page, Raheem Sterling, Chelsea fan banned for life for racially abusive language in Manchester City game. Both our speaker tonight, Jonathan Metliss, and I are members of the Board of Deputies, a body which is committed to protecting the rights and integrity of all religions, promoting interfaith activity and fighting racism. Jonathan Metliss is Chairman of Action Against Discrimination, a charity he established to combat racism in football. He is a long-time anti-discrimination, anti-racism in football activist. For many years, he was a member of football's anti-racism body, Kick It Out. He is chairman of the law firm Axiom Stone and sits on the board of the Conservative Friends of Israel. He was a trustee of Langdon and consultant to Nexus, and is now a consultant to First Regional Accounting, which puts small accountancy firms together. He has a role at Technion UK, introducing technology emanating from the Technion to the local UK business community. Much of what he will say tonight is depressing, but we have a duty to bring the issue into the open in order to fight prejudice.
Thank you. I can't see anybody. Can you see me? Because I can't see anybody, so I'm talking to a blank wall at the moment. Spencer, when did you've disappeared, you've got into the audience, got into the ether. I think he asked me quite a long time ago whether I'd come and speak to you, and I was actually quite flattered, because it's an area that I really believe is not taken as seriously as it ought to be. And actually, if you do read Henry Winter in the Times today, who is a great supporter of the charity I set up, and from time to time explodes into action against the use of the Y word and anti-Semitism in football, but he makes all the points that I'm going to talk about today. Anyway, I was going to start with a bit of humour, not because Spencer said this is a what did he say, depressing subject, but you know, this is the Edgware Shul Mario film show. Is that a fair comment on what's going on? But you actually are not going to see Marianne and Leonard Cohen or whatever. You are going to see a number of slides that I've put together, which shows not only my involvement and my history in endeavouring to combat anti-Semitism in football, although my charity is established to combat racism in football, because we had to do that for all the objects. In terms of the procedure tonight, using a medical expression, I'm going to run you through the slides, which, as Morecambe and Wise said, are the right slides, but not necessarily in the right order. And if you remember that, with Andre Prévin. I think what we can do is perhaps have questions at the end rather than during the talk. And at the end, somebody somewhere will put the light on so I can see who actually I've been talking to. So, starting off, and I'm very atechnical. First of all, just a few answers to this. Teams supported, teams that you support. Can people sort of just say whom they support? I know we've got one West Ham Iron supporter. Chelsea supporters? Can't see. Arsenal, Tottenham? Tottenham. Any non-London club? Sheffield Wednesday, that's a good one. Yeah. Saw Chelsea lose to Sheffield Wednesday 2-0 in the FA Cup. Leeds United, oh, they're not so good. They're bad boys these days. Southampton. Oh, yes, of course. Well, Graham, actually, I must say, he's very good at supporting me, Graham. Graham and I were at university together in 1967 at Southampton University, where we saw Southampton play, Ron Davies, Mike Shannon, Martin Chivers before he went to... and Graham is the lie to the fact that people don't speak to me for a long period of time, because we've been friends for over 50 years, and I'm absolutely thrilled that he's here. I'm also thrilled, and I think he's also disappeared into the ether, our new rabbi from Central Synagogue, which is my shul, Rabbi Barry Lehrer, who's somewhere around. He hasn't come to conquer Edgware because he's got Central to go back to, but I'm sure he'll make his mark as he always does. Right, so starting off, and this is how I always start and you'll recognise the next film. I think I'll press this twice.
There was a word beginning with N that some football fans used to shout at players like me. They don't do it anymore.
There was a word beginning with P that some football fans used to shout at players like me, but they don't do that anymore either.
But for some reason, a lot of fans still shout this word, and it begins with Y.
What they're chanting is a racist word for Jews, the Y word.
The Y word is just as bad and just as offensive as the N word and the P word.
But some of you might think, nah, they just mean Tottenham fans. That's what they call themselves. It's just a bit of a laugh.
Is it? Well, what about these chants?
Apart from anything else, racist chanting is against the law.
It's against the law to call someone a Y word in the streets.
It's against the law to call someone a Y word in a supermarket.
It's against the law to call someone a Y word at a football match. Back in the 1930s and 40s, Jewish people all over Europe were being rounded up and killed. People called them Yids.
So if, in today's game, you fancy joining in with what you think is a bit of harmless chanting, think again.
Think again.
Think again.
Right, now, no, that film was 2011. And actually, Spencer talked about depressing. I haven't seen that since the last talk I gave using this film a couple of years ago. And actually, not only am I depressed by what I hear, but I'm also depressed by the fact that all that still goes on. And that's the reality. And just as an example of that, and I am going through examples, you go, I don't go because although I'm not wearing a kippah at the moment because I'm on duty, although I was reprimanded by somebody from your congregation before for not wearing a kippah. I am Shomri Shabbat now, more or less, and I don't go to football on a Saturday. I certainly don't go to Chelsea away games, because at Chelsea away games, you see people that you saw in that film, and they still exist, and they still chant in exactly the same way. So what I thought I'd do, you've all got a list of the slides or the action points, which you probably can't read, see in the dark, but I thought I'd take you through my career, so to speak, in this area, how I got involved, why I got involved, and why it's been a particularly lonely fight. Because as of today, I'm not quite sure what progress has been made in eradicating that type of behaviour. And what we're talking about actually is not really football per se, it's anti-Semitism being given the chance to prosper in a particular field, which is the field of football. It doesn't happen in rugby, it doesn't happen in cricket, but for whatever reason, it happens in football. And not just at Premier League games, but it happens at the lower level, in schools football, in Jewish football, when young Jewish football teams play non-Jewish teams, it does happen, and that's a fact. So, moving on, that's the charity I set up, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. That's the list of slides, which you've got, which I hope is easier to read in front of you than it is there. So here, this is when it started for me. 6th of March 1982, and Michael there said he was at the same game, Martin even, but I was close, it was an M. Neither of us should have been in the same game because it was a Shabbos afternoon, but we both don't go to those anymore. And this was Chelsea Spurs, 6th of March 1982. But this is an extract from the programme, and I'll read it. This was to have been a colourful commemorative front cover for today's game. However, due to the problems caused by a small lunatic fringe who persist in causing trouble for the club, we have been forced to alter the design in order to make the following statement. If you are here masquerading as a football supporter, but your sole purpose is to cause trouble, then you are not welcome. Your behaviour, as witnessed in the past, will no longer be tolerated. Not only will we ensure that you are ejected from the ground and banned for life from Stamford Bridge, but also Chelsea Football Club will not hesitate to bring a private prosecution, da-da-da-da-da-da. If only that were true, although I was just informed today Chelsea have banned for life the fellow who abused Raheem Sterling, which means he'll probably get into the next home game because they don't stop them. And what I would say, and I am interjecting as I go along because I'm really sort of discussing with myself as well, is that my firm view, and I actually I'm a season ticket holder of Chelsea, over 70, Brentford, Fulham, I love my football. But the reality is, I believe that the anti-Semitism that's displayed and expressed at football grounds up and down the country, and I mentioned specific clubs, is worse in terms of numbers than the anti-black abuse. Because if you look at the anti-black abuse, I hope the door's closed, it's not closed, but I hope the anti-black abuse, these are isolated incidents now. So they abuse Sterling, bananas thrown at the Arsenal player, was it Lacazette? Oh no, the other guy. There was in Montenegro, but that's Montenegro. We're talking about the UK, which is supposedly a civilized country. So I witnessed, my first witnessing of anti-Semitic abuse was at that game. This was National Front, Combat 18, 1 for Adolf, 8 for Hitler, for H. And I attacked, little me, these guys who were chanting, making these anti-Semitic comments. I had a police escort out of the ground, and I vowed from that day on to do my utmost to eradicate this behaviour, not generally, but particularly in football. And now, as Spencer mentioned, I was elected, so they couldn't kick me off, to the Defence Committee of the Board of Deputies, where I sort of promote, cajole, and criticise. So, moving on, this was an article that I wrote. You can't read it now, but just to show you how active I've been. Andrew here, Andrew Sher, was the sports editor of the Jewish News. He's one of the trustees of my charity, of our charity, and he was very supportive in me profiling and promoting this issue, which at that stage had not been addressed by any organisation within the Jewish community. And it's arguable now whether it's taken seriously now, but I'll come on to that. But that was in April 2008, and I'm sure you'll all agree I look just as young now as I did then. So this is a film
Football is a passionate game, so it's no wonder that both on and off the pitch there is a lot of debate and disagreement.
Still trying to go after Steve Bennett here.
Players argue with the ref. Managers argue with managers.
That's another argument, Stefan.
Pundits argue with pundits.
See, I think this is where it all gets carried away in football. It's like,
And everyone debates who should be in the team.
I can't see him playing.
But there are some things that no one argues about. There's no debate here. Those tweets and those chants are anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semitism is racism against Jewish people, and it can take many forms, from calling Jewish people Yids to associating them with money to taunting them about the Holocaust.
It is vile, deeply offensive, and has no place in football. But maybe, just maybe, there are some people who don't agree, who would argue that there's nothing wrong with those chants.
Well, let's have that argument. No argument, no debate. Anti-Semitism is racism.
And we won't tolerate it in football or in our communities. If you see it or hear it, report it.
So what I did, I had a supporter whom you may know, a very fine man called Stephen Rubin, who owns and runs the Pentland Group, which owns a number of sporting brands, big shareholders in JD Sports. And I was the secretary of the Interparliamentary Council Against Anti-Semitism. And he said, Jonathan, you've got to get involved in Kick It Out. So I wasn't allowed. Lord Herman Ouseley was the then chairman. I think he's just about hanging in now. And I insisted on meeting. I went to meet him in the House of Lords. And I said, look, you have no Jewish representation at Kick It Out. I'm particularly concerned about the level, as is the community, of anti-Semitism in English football. When I said UK football before, because there's a problem with Celtic, which I also go on to. And I said I would like to be appointed to the Kick It Out advisory group. And after a bit of pressure and waiting a few weeks, he invited me back to the House of Lords and said, Jonathan, we'd like to have you on board. And then what I wanted to show him was, rather than sit there and just say a few things and basically do nothing, which is what a lot of people do in the House of Lords. No Lords here, are there? What I did in 2014, which wasn't easy, because it was just after my father passed away, and I put together a group of young Jewish guys, and we held an event at Wembley Stadium. It was the Great Room. Gordon Brown was our guest speaker, and we had 850 people in that room. It was the most rewarding event I've ever organised or spoken at, other than tonight. And we raised over £100,000 gross for Kick It Out. And even then, the chairman stood up, spoke about racism in football, and didn't mention anti-Semitism once. And my then partner, who some of you may remember, I think Graham remembers, Martha, who was Tony Blair's PA, she went up to Lord Ousley and gave him a real rollicking. I was going to use another word, but rollicking is good enough. And he came back onto the stage and he said, "Oh, ladies and gentlemen, brothers, I forgot to mention anti-Semitism," which gives you an idea of why I set up what was then called Support for Charity, and we changed its name for Action Against Discrimination. And I have worked with my fellow trustees, including Andrew. We've worked hard to bring the issue to everyone's notice, to engage with the Jewish community organizations who, quite frankly, have done and are still doing not as much, but had done very, very little, and to endeavor to bring pressure on Kick It Out and other organizations, the FA, the Premier League, to treat this seriously. And you're sitting here, you're all committed Jews, other than Graham, but he's honorary, and you know what, you can see what goes on, and this is the reality. Kick It Out, actually, if you look at their program now, we had an impact there because Kick It Out now refer to anti-Semitism in their statistics and their racist discrimination. So that's the charity. Moving on, I wanted to talk about this, not because the board have been particularly special, but this was another impact. And I have the paper here. The board actually, the Defence Committee, to their credit, have acknowledged that this is a major issue. In terms of dealing with it, in the same way as they deal with Corbyn and his acolytes, I'm not quite sure that they're pushing it hard enough, but I'm pushing them to push it harder. And this is a paper that I helped prepare in February this year. And the definition of anti-Semitism in this, it says anti-Semitism can take a number of forms. Chanting, particularly on the terraces during live matches and outside grounds. Abuse directed at Jewish individuals, such as players, managers, referees and supporters, particularly supporters, of course, and online hate, particularly on social media. And I don't go into social media too much here, but if you look at some of the Chelsea fans' websites, the West Ham fans' websites, and other clubs, you will see overt anti-Semitic statements and comments, not dissimilar to what you see in relation to the Labour Party now. It's all although the football anti-Semitism tends to be right-wing, of course the Labour Party is left-wing. So I think the board are very much on side, but as with the board generally, they need actually to take specific action. So moving down, I think, here we go. What we've done as the charity, some of you may have been to this event. This was our sort of headline, anti-Semitism in football, how serious is it now? And that was at JW3, we had 350 people in the room. It does seem like yesterday, although it's a long time ago, and we had the then President of the Board of Deputies, Joe Jacobson, one of the few Jewish footballers who's spoken about anti-Semitism in football that he's encountered, Henry Winter, who is an ally, Anthony Clavane, who wrote the book, as you probably know, Does Your Rabbi Know You're Here? At the football. It's not to do with Rabbi Lehrer, that's just generally. I'm in the book, actually, interestingly enough. Roshin Wood, who got an OBE in the New Year's Honours, no more comment. She's the chief executive of Kick It Out. And Tony Bloom, who's a good guy, who is the owner of Brighton and Hove Albion, who said the only racism he ever heard at the Amex Stadium or the Goldstone Ground was the chant of Sieg Heil. But it wasn't Sieg Heil, it was seagulls. But that was his humour. So we've worked very hard on our events. This was an event we held last year, just before the World Cup, at the Hendon Hall Hotel. which was the venue of, or where the players stayed in 1966, which was the reason for holding it there. And we are very, very active in our publicity, which Andrew is very much indispensable, is the word. I hope he doesn't take that too seriously, but he is. But if there's an issue on anti-Semitism or racism generally, we'll ping out a press release the following day to all the relevant organisations. Not only does it give profile to the charity and for what we do, but it provides profile to the issue. So I was a friend of mine, somebody in PR actually, said, Jonathan, you ought to get involved with the government activities in fighting anti-Semitism. And I was invited and sit on the government's committee tackling racism and anti-Semitism in football. That's the good news. The bad news, I don't think after one meeting I've been to with Andrew, where I was probably the most vociferous guy in the room, either they've had no meetings or I haven't been invited to any of the subsequent meetings. But I think it's the former, that I haven't been invited. But in terms of this charity and in terms of the Jewish community having some representation in government circles, I always felt that I deserve a bit of a pat on the back for that, because we worked really hard to get there. And as I said, Andrew came along and we were quite vociferous and accurate in the facts that we portrayed. So I put this anti-Semitism there. I don't want to build it into a big subject. But of course, we are living in unfortunate times when it comes to anti-Semitism. And as I said, we had our meeting of the Defence Committee of the Board of Deputies last night. And the thing that upsets me the most about this whole anti-Semitic thing, and I must mention, I don't know if any of you remember something called the 43 Group, which was Fort Moseley after the Second World War. My late father was a very prominent member of that. And he didn't mess about. He didn't mess about with me either. But he was very active and quite aggressive in fighting anti-Semitism, and was quite happy to go in with his knuckle dusters. And we're in a situation here where anti-Semitism, for one reason or another, the word has become of common use, and that upsets me the most of all of this, because it's a word now in common parlance, and the more it's used, the less seriously people take it. That's my stance. You don't have to agree with me on that. But we are talking now about anti-Semitism in football in a world, in a time where anti-Semitism is growing. And just on that point, it's a factual point. I have a client, I have some colleagues here from Axiom Stone in the audience as well. We're very happy to hand out their business cards at the end. We have a client who is in the shipping business, and his major source of business now, sadly, is shipping the goods of New Orleans to Israel. So, Spencer talked about topical issue. So, Kick It Out report came out last week, 24th of July, and their headlines were discrimination in both, you can read this, discrimination in both professional and grassroots football rose significantly last season, with reports up by 32%, 422 up from 319 in the previous year. And this is another.
Fucking Jew! Singing on God, Boskin Avenue! Fucking Jew! Singing on God, Boskin! On God, Boskin! On God, Boskin Avenue! Fucking Jew!
Well, there was one sour note during the game at Anfield when Oldham's Tom Adeyemi was reduced to tears after an incident late in the second half. There are reports he was subjected to racist abuse by some Liverpool fans. Merseyside police have told us no one has been arrested for racially aggravated offences.
again. Bobby Zamora has gone from Fulham to Queen's Park Rangers.
Get on team with Campbell Dice! With Campbell Dice! We're having a party with Campbell Dice! We're having a party with Campbell Dice!
I'm going to stop that because it's more of the same and it's all rather distressing. Because if you go to a Chelsea Spurs game at Wembley and you get on the tube at Baker Street or Marylebone, that's what you get. Even today, and you'll get it tomorrow or next week and the week after. And all that anti-Semitic chanting with the Nazi salutes, you go to any Chelsea away game. And I will use a Hebrew word here, emet, be'emet. It goes on every single game. So you have a situation at Chelsea, I'm sort of jumping around a bit, but it's relevant. You have a situation at Chelsea who, and you read it in the paper, who purport to be conducting a campaign against the anti-Semitism in the club. Well, I don't actually think taking Eden Hazard, who actually signed an anti-Israel protest petition to Auschwitz, or playing Boston Red Sox, it's not Red Sox, they're a baseball team, but the Boston, whatever they're called, the New England Raiders, I think it was, to raise money, is fighting anti-Semitism. And in my view, and I've told Chelsea and I've told the World Jewish Congress, who weren't interested, that this is superficial and cosmetic and is not dealing with the issue. And it doesn't deal with the issue. Moving into this other fact, faith-based discrimination rose higher than any other, increasing by 75% from 33 to 63. And you could argue that that is also as a result of the economic racist climate in which we now live. And I can assure you, on a regular basis, through my CFI contacts and elsewhere, approached every single sports and culture minister. Does everybody know who the new culture minister is? Yeah, Nikki Morgan, yeah. So I haven't quite got to her, but everyone, and not one government official or minister has shown any interest in this. The only member of parliament who has shown any slight interest was a fellow called David Burrows, who was the Conservative member for Enfield and whatever's next to Enfield, whatever. Anyway, and he lost in the last election, Theresa May's election. Right, I got Community Securitas were very helpful. See, the Community Security, the CST will not deal with this at its inception. They will just deal with any reports of anti-Semitism. So these are their figures. So 380, so it's sort of consistent, but consistently not good. 38 in 2017 and 43 in 2018. And I come on to some CST examples. Now, unfortunately, you can't read this. I actually have the original article. This is Henry Winter, wrote this article the day after our event in 2016, banning the Y word. And actually, even in today's Times, he says, as a sort of PS, but he says it, and Tottenham Hotspur fans really need to move on from the Y word. He makes the point. I'm a Chelsea supporter because my family had pubs in the West End, so it was Chelsea for football and Surrey for cricket. But my family are all Tottenham supporters because my late father-in-law was a furniture manufacturer and in Tottenham. And they're all Tottenham supporters. We have big family debates. In fact, we don't have family debates, we have rows over, as families do, over the Y word and the significance of it. I am absolutely 150% against the use of the Y word at any sporting or other occasion. 2, I was on the board of Tottenham Hotspur. I don't mention this. I was on the board of ENIC for 10 years. And I looked up, Daniel Levy was a client of mine, and I saw him the other week in a restaurant in the West End. We're in contact, but not great contact. And I said to you, you've got a wonderful new stadium, but the only problem is that you are uttering anti-Semitic expletives, which doesn't bring the club into a good light. And I'm going to read here, this is my Morecambe Wise, the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order, which was Grieg's Piano Concerto, Andrei Previn. The word Yid is a slang Jewish ethnonym of Yiddish origin. Whether pronounced Jid, rhyming with did, some have perceived it as pejorative and has been used as a derogatory epithet by anti-Semites along with and as an alternative to the English word Jew. Yid is used as a badge of pride by the supporters of Tottenham Hotspur. Such usage is controversial, and in 2013 has been addressed by the UK Society for Black Lawyers as well as the British Prime Minister, who I think at the time may have been David Cameron, but we know what he did. And so the term Yid has its origins in the Middle High German word Jude. The contemporary German word is Jude. From the German Jude, Jew and Jew is a truncated form of Yehuda. Anyway, that's just going back into the history. So I start from a basis that the word Yid is an abusive term for a Jew. And if we go back to the Y Word film at the beginning, you've got Ledley King saying, don't use the N word. You've got the Asian footballer who I can't remember who it was now, but he says don't use the P word. And there was another ethnic group said don't use another word. And in fact, to his credit, Frank Lampard, I didn't go to the Reading friendly game on Sunday afternoon. Actually, I was at the Board of Deputies. Maybe I should have gone to the Reading game. Anyway, I didn't mean to say that, but I said it. I think that the Chelsea supporters, not against Jews, but were using the word pikey, which is an abusive word towards West Ham supporters, and Frank Lampard was reported as saying, I don't want to hear this nonsense. But what have Chelsea done to date? Haven't condemned a thing, haven't said a word. So it's a gypsy, yeah, from sort of the East End, South End, or what have you. Now, interestingly, if I can find it, I can find it. I got a letter from Garth Crooks yesterday, who said, Dear Jonathan, you all know who Garth Crooks is. He was in that team in 1982. Correct. And where did he go after Tottenham? Because you obviously know your football, or you think you do. He went to Manchester United. Yeah. Anyway, dear Jonathan, thank you for this invitation, but sadly I'm unable to make this event. This is a real disappointment to me, as I would have been very keen to engage in this debate. There's not a debate yet. He's a trustee at Kick It Out, and we are inviting him to join our group as a trustee. He's a good guy. Quite apart from the Labour Party's disgraceful approach to anti-Semitism, I'm equally perplexed by the attitude to this issue from the Tottenham Hotspur board, who seem reluctant to ban the Y word or take action against home fans using the term at games. He carries on that point, the anti-Semitic language in grounds, I will be raising this matter later in the year with the club in my role as independent chair of the Premier League Equality Panel. Now, I'm very close, and he's a big supporter of ours, who wrote the article in the Mirror of John Cross, who's an Arsenal supporter, and he told me confidentially, which is why I'm telling you, that that Spurs had been considering making the new stadium a Y-word free zone, but they bottled it. Why do they bottle it? Because as my friend David Dean said to me once, morality and football don't get together. It's all about the money. For hakesef. So that's Garth Crooks, who is very supportive of the banning of the Y word. And I was going to, Andrew knows, but I was sort of talked out of it. Maybe I was a bit scared, I don't know. But I think it was a Shabbos, actually. It was the first league game at the new stadium, and we were going to demonstrate, saying banning the Y word. But we didn't chicken out. We will do it. I mean, it will happen. It's a question of timing. I've got to get the media behind and so on and so forth. So the CST have given me these examples of anti-Semitic incidents, recent ones, at football grounds. From 2017, anti-Semitic graffiti was found on the toilet doors of Vicarage Road during the Hornets' New Year's Day fixture against Spurs. It said, "Gas all the Yids and cut the scummers' ears off." Image attached, I got that. This was reported via Kick It Out. Just on Watford, 2 years ago, when Watford beat Chelsea 4-1, my younger brother, he's old, shows you how old I am, we were sitting with the Chelsea supporters who were chanting, "Martin Chivers." I hope this doesn't offend the ladies in the audience, by the way, all this stuff, but it's reality. Martin Chivers was a Jew, he was circumcised, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. We immediately went to the stewards at Watford, who actually were quite good because they said, "You better go away because you're going to get beaten up." And I didn't fancy that in particular. But we had the seat numbers and the photographs. Question to you, what did the police do? What did Chelsea Football Club do? Absolutely correct. Nothing. And we had the seat numbers and the visual images of these guys. So that's why I keep going, because at some stage there'll be somebody in authority who will say, "We've got to put a stop to this." In December 2018, following a Chelsea game, 2 men were heard chanting on the Victoria line. Serves them right for being on the Victoria line. "We've got foreskins, we've got the usual foreskin stuff." But that goes on all the time. Every Chelsea away game it happens. Every Chelsea away game. And my friend Robert Steen, who is a big Chelsea supporter, one of our trustees, reported it to Kick It Out, who did absolutely nothing. This is not Losh and Horror on Kick It Out. It may sound it, a little bit of it, but they did absolutely nothing in endeavouring to identify the perpetrators and dealing with the clubs. In April 2019, a group of West Ham fans, excluding Malcolm O'Brien, were filmed on the Metrolink. Not quite sure what that is. Travelling to a game against Manchester United. Usual, we'll be running around Tottenham with our willies hanging out. And this was a game against Manchester United. Tottenham were nowhere near it. I once saw at Chelsea Luke Young, who was playing for Charlton Athletic. I've never heard so much abuse towards a white player at a football match, because he played for Spurs. So the Chelsea crowd at the Matthew Harding end, the Yid, you effing, the whole thing. And also at Chelsea, and I've been going to Chelsea since 1956, guy came up to me, you can see me, I can't see you, once, and he went like that, the nose. What do? You go to a steward, stewards don't know, they're not trained, they don't understand, they're scared. Anyway, that's what goes on. And before the Liverpool Spurs Champions League final, which I hope nobody of you went to because it was on a Shabbos, but apparently you were allowed to walk to the stadium as long as you had your ticket in your back pocket. A man tweeted, "Liverpool fans getting gassed for the CL final against Tottenham, getting gassed for the CL final," with a picture of a Liverpool fan singing next to a photo of Jews in concentration camps. This was reported by CST by someone who witnessed the tweet. So that is current, and that's in Europe. And what did UEFA do? What did they say knew about it? Absolutely nothing. So there you've had plenty of examples of anti-Semitic chanting, both past, present and current. And I can assure you, when you go to Chelsea, if you go to Chelsea Manchester United on the opening day of the season at Manchester, on the trains they'll be at it again. I'm certainly not going. There was a Leeds supporter there, but Leeds are pretty bad. In the days of Manny Cousins and Leslie Silver, it was a Jewish club. And I acted for Leeds. Peter Ridsdale was a good friend of mine when I did all my football stuff at my S.J. Berwin law firm. And I was in the boardroom at Leeds Chelsea, and that nice Semitic loving man, Ken Bates, he goes up to Peter Ridsdale and he says, "You know, we've got more Jewish supporters than any other club in London. The issue is they've all had nose jobs." And that's what he said in front of all of us. And that was the guy who was running Chelsea. And that has a lot to do with how the Chelsea supporters behave now. Celtic is another issue, which I haven't brought up, which we all understand is the connection between anti-Semitism and criticism of the State of Israel, which we know is intertwined and is so. When don't tell me that Emily Thornberry, when she says that Israel's worse than Iran, that she loves the Jewish community. So I'm not going there. But Celtic, which is a Catholic club, the Celtic supporters are constantly parading pro-Palestinian and Palestinian flags. And arguably that's anti-Semitic. It's certainly not in the best interests of the Jewish or the Israeli communities. So those I've sort of identified as the major culprits. And I think this is a film because Spencer's been very clever because he's sort of interspersed these films. I don't think this is very pleasant.
You're getting gassed in the morning! I got fucking having you!
So that says that it is all very clear and all very current. Now, this is a particularly insidious movement, which is called Football Against Apartheid. And if you go to Arsenal, you see these guys parading their wares outside Highbury Tube Station. I go to a lot of football because I like the sport actually, but these guys I have said my piece towards them, and you'll see you've got Israel, Palestine, and they brought this into the UK game. And as far as I'm aware, no action has been taken by any club in dealing with these people. But they are a growing movement, and it's basically anti-Israel flowing over into anti-Semitism. So I just put this together. This is where I come in as a lawyer. There is plenty of adequate legislation to deal with offenders. Public Order Acts, the first one was in 1936, which was introduced to combat Mosley and his supporters. The Football Offences Act, 1991, Section 3 of the Football Offences Act makes racial chanting a criminal offence, and the Crime and Disorder Act, 1998, is combating hooliganism and so on and so forth. The last two were introduced by the Labour government. So the statutory legislation is there to deal with the issue. Football authorities. Now, Henry Winter today couldn't have said it better. Ultimately, the power remains with the FA and the Premier League. In Europe, everyone seems to have given up on UEFA, whose response to racism involves a paltry fine and covering some seats with equal game banner, "You're not going to beat a bigot," with a flag and a hashtag. And I will add various signs and notices which says, "We will not tolerate racism." I went to a Kick It Out reception last summer at Wembley. I think it commemorated Kick It Out's 30th year, maybe. I went up to the then chairman of the FA. I think he's still the chairman of the FA. I said, "I'm Jonathan Metliss. I run a charity called Action Against Discrimination, and we are anxious and concerned about anti-Semitism in football, and I'm particularly anxious of the fact that you do nothing to combat it in any shape or form." And you may remember when Nicholas Anelka made the Quinnell sign, he was banned for 5 games, one of which he was injured for, one of which he was suspended. It was absolutely, in reality, it was meaningless. And Malky Mackay, this isn't in my script here, but Malky Mackay accused my friend Phil Smith, the agent, of being a fat, greedy Jew. He then became the assistant manager of Scotland. Thank you very much. Very, very nice. So the football authorities, the Football Association, Richard Scudamore, who gave an extra £5 million to, did he give the £5 million to? No, he got an extra £5 million. Walks past my house in the West End, and I'm always saying to him, why at the Premier League don't you deal with anti-Semitism in football? Just walks on, not interested. UEFA, you know what the fines are for being racist in Europe. Absolutely paltry, because it's all about the money and not upsetting the supporters. So, current initiatives. Football authorities can be damned. Current initiatives. Well, obviously I'm going to say that action against discrimination, we're working very hard to influence the football authorities, the Jewish community in particular, to take this seriously. And as I said, to be fair, the Board of Deputies have adopted this as part of their defence strategy, but clearly more needs to be done. The clubs, I forgot to mention the clubs. The clubs do absolutely nothing. A warning is meaningless. What I would do, if I was chairman of Tottenham Hotspur, which is never going to happen, I can assure you, I would certainly ban the Y word immediately. And if I was the chairman of Chelsea Football Club, well, the owner lives in Tel Aviv, who's half Jewish, his father's Jewish, his mother's not. But I would go into the crowd, and anybody uttering any anti-Semitic comment, not only be banned, would be prosecuted, charged, and receive the appropriate sentence. But sadly, it doesn't happen. So, my conclusion is that, look, like everything in life, you can take it or leave it. If you think it's serious, and you think it's upsetting, and you think it's degrading, you deal with it. If you think, well, life carries on, Chelsea won the UEFA Cup, the supporters are anti-Semitic, Eden Hazard signed an anti-Israel petition, so what? You know, I'm getting my pleasure out of it. But I do believe, as a Jewish community, we have a duty and an obligation, in the same way as it's fighting Corbyn and the Labour Party, to do its utmost to eradicate the examples of anti-Semitism in football that I've shown tonight. Thank you very much.
Jonathan Metliss has made a very significant contribution to the issue tonight, and we shall be placing this session shortly on YouTube for a much wider audience. I think it's clear that we have to change attitudes and bring people on side. The story is told that God and the devil were having an argument, and Satan proposed a football game between heaven and hell to resolve the dispute. God pointed out that it wouldn't be a fair match because all the good players go to heaven. The devil smiled, replying, yes, but we've got all the refs. I think it's important that in the future we convert the refs so that we're all on the same side. I started this evening by quoting community singing, "When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark." Remember, we finish with, at the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Let us hope that football improves in the future and that it's a safe environment for everyone. I'd like to thank Jonathan for a most successful evening and giving us all the information that we needed to know about discrimination in football. And here's a little thank you for you.